Well, thank you everyone for joining us for the latest in the Millennial Insight series online. My name is Mark Catchlove and I lead the Millennial Insight Group, which is responsible for sharing Millennial's research. And in case you don't know Millennial, we are a family of brands and they're all listed in front of you. And all these brands design and manufacture product for places where people live, where they learn, where they get healed, and where they work. I'm really pleased today that we're going to be focusing on the workplace, and our guest speaker today is Nicola Gillen from Cushman and Wakefield, and I'm going to let Nicola introduce herself. Please use the chat box for questions and observations as we go along. Nicola, looking forward to a great session. Over to you.
Great, thanks a lot, Mark, and thanks everybody. I could see some familiar names flash up there, so hi everybody, great to have you with us. So I'm Nicola Gillen. I lead consulting for Cushman's in EMEA and Total Workplace in EMEA also. And I'm going to take you through a summary of some of the ideas from our latest book, Reworking the Workplace, which we published with the RIBA. I'm an architect and author, and I spend most of my time working with clients on live projects. I'm going to also intersperse some of the book findings with some of our latest data points. So I'll go through people and data, purpose of workplace, and then place and experience. And in addition to the book, which is on the right-hand side there, and involved, 40 people globally in terms of writing that, lots of over 50 international case studies of what people are doing with their workplaces and cities around the world. The book is about the future of work, workplace, and the city. And to bring it right up to date, as I said, I've interspersed some data from our experience per square foot tool, which I'll talk you through as we go through, and also our latest What Occupiers Want survey, which is a biannual survey that we do with Cornet, and that goes to real estate decision makers globally. So if you like, it's a kind of a top-down data set, whereas experience per square foot goes to employees around the world. So that's a bottom-up data set. So we'll bring those two lenses in here to bring it right up to date. And there's over 13 million data points in experience per square foot now. So I will set the scene, first of all, with really the context of the book. And what it's really about is that work and community are inextricably linked. Indeed, for a lot of us, work is probably our main community that we interact with. And work is a really major driver of architecture and the city in terms of accommodating that activity. And then, of course, place has a really fundamental role in terms of human connection and positive social impact. So if we look at the image on the right-hand side, that is an 11th century church near where I live. And if the camera were just to pan to the right, you would see the village pub. And if it was to pan further to the right, you would see the village shop. And these have been places of connection and exchange and shared values and inspiration for hundreds, if not thousands of years in many communities around the world. So it really sets the scene in terms of how critical place is to us as human beings and the ongoing enduring importance of place in an increasingly virtual world. So obviously COVID really rewrote the rule book in terms of work, or rather it accelerated it. It didn't actually create any change in itself. And we see some shifts in terms of work culture around things like reframing the employee-employer covenant, looking for more evidence-based insights in terms of driving workplace solutions. And these things really are here to stay. We don't see a situation where they're likely to go back. So the first part of the book is really focused on what is work and what does it mean to be human at work. So we have a whole series of models in there. On the left-hand side, you can see the 6 networks of work community, which we break down and discuss in terms of what we're trying to accommodate around things like knowledge, career building, learning, social network. And then on the right, we start to look at some of the dimensions that that translates into, and therefore what our physical environments are trying to accommodate in terms of things like, individual work, synchronous versus asynchronous work, the role of personality, and we'll come back to that, about the importance of, creating inclusive environments and thinking very broad brushstrokes about that in terms of half the population is introvert, and we don't tend to design for that in a very meaningful way. So that's a little bit of scene setting. So I'll go into some of the data now, which brings us right up to date. So this is our experience per square foot survey tool, which measures experience against these 5 different indices that you can see on the left. People's ability to focus, to team with others, to learn, to bond, and to renew, which is about maintaining your energy levels over the course of the day. And on the right-hand side there, you can see our experience scores since 2020, which have remained pretty stable with a little dip in 23. Now, what you're looking at here along the top line is the overall experience score at 65%, people reporting their ability to do their best work at 70%, which is good, that's high. And then you can see well-being, which is only at 40%. Now, what the bars underneath do is they break down these overall scores into whether people had choice or they did not have choice. So the first 2 here are about if people have choice over where they work, their location flexibility. And the bottom one is about choice over their schedule or their diary flexibility. And what this consistently tells us is if you take choice away from people, regardless of whether you're asking them to work in the office or at home, it significantly drops their experience scores. So the choice is what's driving the scores there. And then if we look at that data by generation, you can see that the oldest in the workforce are reporting the highest levels of well-being and the youngest are reporting the lowest. So we'll come back to that as we go on. You can see these are those scores split down in a little more detail by year. So well-being continues to be the most concerning of the metrics that we gather here. Because, of course, when people are reporting higher levels of well-being, they're 4 times more likely to say that they're able to do their best work. And that's of significant importance to organizations, especially now where such a high percentage of real estate organizations are reporting into HR as opposed to finance. So if we look now at a little more detail in terms of what's driving the well-being across generation, that's along the top, 1 to 5, and then the generations is down the side, youngest at the top with Gen Z. Very interesting to see that renew, the 4 yellow boxes, is the top driver of well-being across all generations. It was the poorest performing aspect of well-being before COVID, and we still haven't fixed that. So it's still a really big problem in offices. And that is the ability to get away, the ability to get some quiet space, to recuperate after, an intense session and be ready for the rest of the day. And then interesting, number 2, just for the youngest in the workforce, is about inspiration as the second biggest driver for well-being. So if we look at, some of you, I'm sure, are very familiar with Dunn's 8 dimensions of wellness. I think sometimes people can have quite a specific view on what is well-being. He really looked at these 8 different dimensions, which all come together to create a sense of well-being in employees. The kind of straightforward things that we would understand straight away is things like ergonomic setup, occupational health. But on the right-hand side, we start to get to other factors which can be just as impactful around things like social health, how included do people feel, and intellectual health, how stimulated do they feel. And on the right-hand side is one of the case studies from the book, which is one of the Maggie Centres in the UK. Maggie Centres are cancer care spaces. Some of you, particularly in the UK, will know about them. Maggie was a cancer patient in Scotland, and she was married to Charles Jenks, who is a very famous American landscape architect. And they came together to create these incredibly inspirational healing places where patients come to connect with others, to recuperate, to get support. And the book features the case studies, particularly from the point of view of during COVID, when the patients themselves couldn't use these spaces, so they were used by frontline A&E staff in the UK as a place to step away from the front line and just recover during their breaks and go back out to help the public. So an incredibly powerful case study of wellness and buildings. So if we get into the purpose of place, this is from our What Occupiers Want survey, which actually only came out last week, so it's hot off the press. And this gives you the top 5 drivers for real estate according to real estate decision makers. Number 1 is cost, which tends to be in the top 3 all the time. Number 2 is about the challenges of evolving organizational models. A lot of that is driven by the fact that real estate, as I said earlier, is now reporting into HR. They're now having to get involved in managing experience rather than just managing real estate. And this is really shifting the skills that they need to do their jobs and the metrics that they're seeking in order to drive change. It's interesting to see how these evolve over the years. I won't read through all of this, but this will be one of the links that Mark will send out later so you can see the whole report. So this now is back to employee data, the bottom-up data. You can see on the left, you won't be surprised with what employees tell us are the top 5 reasons that they come to the office: collaboration, relationships, socialize. And on the right, it's how they report the effectiveness of their current office buildings in satisfying collaboration, relationships, and socializing, which is not so good. So you can see there's a huge amount of work there to do in terms of bringing offices up to speed in terms of what people are looking for post-COVID. This is starting, I don't think we can ever do a presentation like this without talking about occupancy in offices. It can be quite a boring topic actually, but we keep getting asked it. So we've put some data in here. So this is, this shows you that actually the youngest in the workforce are the keenest in terms of coming in. And that's again, back to those work networks that I talked about at the beginning, which is about, youngest in the workforce building networks, learning, social networks, etc. And then the oldest in the workforce, which are probably those who have, a room at home that nothing happens in other than work, and they've got their networks already built, so it's not such a priority for them. And then these are some of the straight occupancy numbers, and you can see there the balance between primary remote, which is the gray, the blue is hybrid, and the navy blue is primary in office. So you can see there that there's quite a difference in terms of the regions, and America is largest in terms of primary remote at 48% in contrast to 12% in APAC. So we get another thing we get asked an awful lot about is mandating. This data on the left-hand side I took you through earlier, which is the impact of choice on experience, which shows that if you take people's choice away, then their experience scores are significantly reduced. And then on the right-hand side, we see what happens if you introduce mandates. So typically, we are at about 40% of time that offices are occupied today. That number is pretty consistent across Europe and the US. So when mandates are introduced, that will increase it by 14% to 54%, which is still below pre-pandemic levels, which were about 60%. But more concerning is the 2 orange bars on the right-hand side, which show that the impact of mandates on doing best work and employee experience is far more significant. And of course, employees cost far more than real estate. So proceed with caution in terms of mandating. So this section now is about place and experience. And one of the sections in the book really looks at drawing from retail and entertainment environments, which are much better at managing experience because they've had to do it for so much longer than offices are. And we'll talk in a moment about some of those case studies and what we can learn from experience destinations. So this diagram is in the book and was created or led by Zoe Humphreys. And this is really illustrating what goes on in a person's head when they're trying to decide, should I come into the office today or not? So they're feeling how good an investment of time and resources is this experience? And when I get there, how well spent is that investment? And what is my return on investment of that? And by resources, they're thinking about time, they're thinking about money, they're thinking about their energy levels. So on the right-hand side, then, this translates into, in terms of workplace experience, looking to remove the hurdles that make the thought of coming into the office unappealing or too difficult. Number two, making the space enticing enough for people to want to make that investment to come in the first place, and then compelling enough that they want to come back. Now, this is exactly the psychology that entertainment spaces and retail spaces go through, and now it's time for offices to do the same. So here's some examples of some of the entertainment environments that we feature in the book. So on the left-hand side is an interesting example of a regeneration of a big landmark department store in Edinburgh, which was very well known, right on the corner in the middle of Edinburgh, which of course is a global city with a huge volume of traffic. Was not enough to keep people in that department store. And so it has been turned into the Johnny Walker experience, Johnny Walker the whiskey. So you go in and work your way up through the building and you get the whole experience of how the whiskey is made, how it's tasted, and you can finish on the top with an amazing view of Edinburgh Castle and immerse yourself in the product and experience associated with that. And then on the right-hand side is an interesting temporary use for a stadium in London, which is called the Selfie Factory at Ticky Town, which is a place where people can go and create videos for social media, which has been very popular and effectively a temporary studio space, a great use of an underused space. And then thinking about that in the office environment, on the left-hand side, we have Capita Springs, which is one of the newest towers in Singapore, which is really changing the iconography of towers and indeed the ESG values of it. They have a vertical garden that goes the whole way up the tower. So it's a very green experience for people and unexpected. And then on the right-hand side, bottom right there, is the Electricity Supply Board's HQ in Dublin, where I am today. And they have created, they are an institution here in Ireland, and they have created a new HQ, which is a city block, created a new walkway through to connect two streets that were previously not connected, and lots of great atrium spaces, connections with community on the ground floor, and then up to an employee roof terrace on the top. So thinking about what we've learned from some of these experience destinations, and in the book we look at, we look at Disney, we look at places like Johnny Walker and a lot of others to see, well, how are they doing it, and how can we apply this to the workplace? So I'm not going to read through all of these, but just to give you a sense of what we talk about. The first is about the interconnection of people, purpose, and place. The second is location and physical presence of the architecture. And I think location is one of the things that's really shifted since COVID, and the importance of having buildings in well-connected spaces that are easy to get to. We've really seen the demise of, out of town or difficult to get to buildings, and have seen those needing to change use into other sorts of activities. So location is absolutely critical. Also permeable, particularly at ground floor, that these buildings become part of the city, contributing to the city, as opposed to having, locked gates that people can't pass through. Connection to nature, framing moments for communities of people to create memories in the space. And then very importantly, the data-driven user insights to keep the experience fresh and keep it relevant. So there's a lot in the book that I'm not going to touch on, which is around things like technology and the connection between digital and virtual interfaces. This is about defining value, and how do we define value in real estate? So, hundreds or thousands of years ago, even, the diagram on the right was about the fields that were closest to the marketplaces where we exchanged goods and services commanded the highest rents. And that has remained the base principle for the value of an asset for centuries. And on the left, you start to see how that has shifted over time from access to natural amenities. So, that's why cities grew up around rivers and ports, into advanced amenities, which is about the Industrial Revolution, being close to power, etc., into agglomeration, which is about being close to talent pools or natural resources of a particular kind, and then through to where we are now at the top, which is about serendipity. And it's about this focus on experience in a much greater knowledge economy than we had at the beginning of this diagram. So if we go on to just simplify this into what do we think are the new 3 value drivers for physical space, we get to amenity, agglomeration, and serendipity. So amenity and agglomeration are the traditional values. They remain important, but they can largely be synthesized remotely. And we really felt this during COVID. What we missed was the connection with other people. What we missed was the connection to community, and from a corporate point of view, the connection to culture and brand. So actually the new factor around driving value in physical space is all about that. It's about serendipity, experience, and a sense of belonging. So this starts to look then at other location factors. We ask in the What Occupier Wants survey, what are the preferred locations for HQs? As we see work becoming more remote, as we see remote workforces grow in organizations, we were interested to see what real estate decision makers' view on this was. And as you can see, the majority, 57%, is still saying that they would locate their HQs in central business districts. And again, that becomes really, rather than command and control, which would have been an old model, into something that's about experiencing brand. So for example, if people know the new Diageo HQ or the new GSK HQ in central London, they are all about brand expression, and they are right in the middle of the shopping district in the city, which is a really interesting shift. So this is another example of how to reuse or regenerate, in this case, a Battersea power station, which is on the South Bank in London, which has been regenerated into a large mixed-use workplace, residential, retail, and substantial public realm that has really contributed to how the city has developed in that part of London. So in the book, we talk about communities and placemaking, and we talk about 4 types of modern work communities. So we have social in the yellow, which is about people coming together to meet each other and engage in amenities and experience. Entrepreneurial, top right, which is about startup culture, tech, often located or co-located next to universities. Then we have regenerative, which is the Battersea Power Station example and the Johnny Walker example earlier, and also temporal, which is about creating meanwhile spaces while developments are being worked on. So in each section in the book, we probably have 8 or 10 case studies in each of these different sections, which give you an idea as to what's happening around the world in terms of latest developments. I'll just give you a high-level overview of 4 of them here. So the first here is Mission Rock in San Francisco. Anybody dialing in from there, I'm sure will know this. It's a very large mixed-use area, and this is one of the towers in there, which again, like Capita Springs, is redefining the iconography and purpose of a tower. You can see it's deconstructed in terms of being broken down there with the terraces. And maybe just behind the O1 and social, you can see that that continues through the public realm. So you've got these very large stepped public realm all around the building, which really blends the building and its ground floor into the surrounding city and makes this much more of a city design and regeneration project than a standalone building we might have seen 10 years ago. So top right there is Plus X in Brighton, which is a co-working space for maker-doer startups. Fascinating place to go see. People are making things and putting things together. And it is right opposite the main gates to Brighton University. So it's a real hub, a real entrepreneurial hub for people that are starting up businesses. Number 3 there is Sunderland City Hall, which is part of a large regeneration of the city centre. Sunderland was a very strong industrial city in northern England, very strong shipbuilding history there. And you can see there in the middle, absolutely beautiful steel staircase that was crafted by the old shipbuilding craftspeople in Sunderland, now turning their expertise into other arenas. And then on the bottom right is Temporal, which is Sayre Street, again in London, which is about creating a meanwhile use or community that talks to both the existing community to try and address any potential concerns around gentrification, as well as drawing in and developing new communities that will eventually use the building once it is built. So this is coming to the conclusions then of what we're talking about. Really, the key message in the book is about the enduring importance of place in an increasingly dispersed and virtual world, and the unique role that place has to provide meaning for communities and health and well-being for people. So this is on the green elements here, looking at things like what it means to be human at work, what it is we're trying to accommodate, the role of buildings in health and positive social impact in terms of integration into the cities around them, managing and maintaining and creating compelling workplace experiences that draw people in and make them want to return, and reassessing the value and purpose of place, focusing on, as well as amenity and agglomeration, those traditional value drivers, looking at serendipity, which is about experience and creating a sense of belonging and unexpected interactions with people. So all of this is about understanding work in terms of what we're trying to accommodate. And then, as I said, the role of architecture and place in terms of communities, and ultimately the evolution of cities, because work is a major driver for cities and what it is they need to accommodate going forward. So I think this is the final slide, I think, which goes back to our experience per square foot database. This is some output from the global database, which looks at where to focus your investment in order to drive the best workplace experience. Now, obviously, this could vary across data sets and regions, but this is the overall summary. And number 1 is about creating a sense of community. Number 2 is about providing choice and supporting well-being. Number 3 is about purpose and experience and the challenges of managing that. Number 4 is about giving people privacy and access to quiet spaces and that time to sort of unwind and recuperate between meetings and interactions. And then number 5, which has been around a long time, is the integration of tech, place, and the city. So I think that is, yes, it is. That is the final slide. So I will stop sharing here and very happy to go to questions.
Great, thank you very much for that. Yep, there are a few questions. Do keep them coming in. Just an observation from Keely, which I thought was interesting. As a furniture dealer, we're starting to see a lot more soft furnishings and homely items being placed in the office environment. You get any observations the same with that, Nicola? Much more homely environments?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a definite, I think it's a generational shift in terms of, you know, what is work, away from the old-fashioned corporate, which was, you know, all about command and control, towards something that's much more about people. And so with that, we see a shift in scale, and that's about, you know, the sort of settings and furniture, etc., that people are gravitating towards.
Thank you. Brian asks, is there a specific feedback on what can be done to address some of those low stats on the effect of the office? That when people are there, that some of those scores were low, that meeting their requirements. Is there any advice, I guess, feedback? What can we do about it?
Well, yeah, well, I mean, the first thing is to talk to people and gather data, right, about what it might be, because it could be, you know, the design is wrong. It could be the provision is wrong. It could be something more architectural, like it could be to do with air quality, or it could be to do with light quality in a building, or it could just be about change management. It might be actually that the space is right, but nobody has explained to people or helped them through what they would use this for. And that's something that happens quite commonly, actually, that element is forgotten. So it's, you know, you can't lift people up and drop them in a new space and expect them to know what to do.
And on a project where that needs to be done, who are the people that you're dealing with, Nicola? At what level and in what departments do you engage with?
So I would say very commonly we're dealing with C-suite, because the buildings are seen as part of their strategic plan in terms of employee engagement. And that's because I think it's about 40% of real estate organizations now are reporting into HR as opposed to reporting into finance or procurement. And obviously they care about very different things. And so it's definitely changing the focus and priorities for workplace for us. And you see that, I think, right across the whole real estate industry. You know, when developers are leasing buildings, they are increasingly taking HR around the building rather than real estate, and they will be asking very different questions about what the building gives them.
Yeah, great. It's interesting. We're starting to speak at more HR conferences because people are interested in that place. It's we all know it has impact. David's given you a tough one to answer, and he admits it. Do you have any data and insights as to the percentage of underutilized space, either specifically or generically, in a typical office environment? Underutilized space.
Well, we know that offices are used about 40% of the time in Europe and the US, so 60% is not used. So that's the big figure, and that can be due to lots of things. It can be due to the location of the building. It can be due to the quality of the design in the building. And then, you know, within a floor plate, you might get some variety then in terms of how much different spaces are used, again, depending on the nature of work that's happening there or the quality of the settings.
Thank you. Interesting observation around co-working. Have you seen a decline in co-working spaces? Someone's mentioned an organization, one of the large ones in Chicago has just closed down. Are you seeing a change of that? Any differences there?
I think occupiers' desire for short leases and pay-as-you-go is increasing. I don't think that's going away. I think perhaps, you know, there was a saturation with certain brands. So maybe there's a rebalancing happening there. And I think for startups or small companies, I think it remains that there is a market for them to get together with other people, because it can be very isolating to only work remotely. So I think the market is still going to require that flexibility in terms of variety of lease lengths. But location is key, right? So there's no point in setting up one of those sorts of spaces somewhere that isn't bang on city center or major transport hubs. So maybe that's what the Chicago brand is looking at.
Yeah, thank you. Do you think there is a direct, thank you, Pallavi, for this question. Do you think there is a direct link to remote work and to mental health in the workforce, or between remote work and mental health in the workplace?
I think it's very variable depending on personality and the sort of work people do. I think there will be some people who will be more than happy working remotely, especially with the way AI has developed and can be a very good research companion to people. So I think there will be a percentage of the population that will remain very satisfied and productive working remotely. I think there's others who require a much higher touch with other human beings. But I think it's all about a balance. I think hybrid working is about a balance, and it's different for different people. And of course, it very much depends on the nature of the work that people do. And also, one of the things that we talk about a lot in the book is, obviously, if you're a sole trader and you work for yourself, that's one story. You're free to do whatever you want to do to accommodate your clients. If you work for an organization or a team, it can't be just about you as an individual and what you prefer to do. It's about what is also effective for the team overall. And I think that's something where we're really working that balance out at the moment.
In fact, that leads me on to Matt's question, is what are your thoughts about how future workplaces or workplaces generally support distributed teams?
Yeah, well, I think distribution is here to stay. We've seen significant workforce shifts in terms of corporates hiring in what we might have called secondary geographies before, rather than just, I think there was a perception you had to be in a global hub in order to have access to, a huge range of job choice. And I don't think that's the case anymore. I think that's really been broken down, which is really great because that's about increased diversity in the workforce. But in terms of keeping those people connected, that's about the quality of the technology, and it's about the culture of the organizations that they're working in. For example, my brother has a tech startup, and they are all in different countries. They never ever see each other, but once a year they get together in a very memorable city, and they spend 2 or 3 days together having fun. So they don't actually work when they are physically together. When they're physically together, they play and they bond. So I think we may start to see more of that as we go forward.
Thank you. Marsha asks, are you seeing that as people return to the office, are old behaviours settling back in again, like not willing to try new office designs, or even support go back to a community experience where basically they're creating their own walls again, almost?
I think that might vary by sector, and I think it might vary by geography. For many sectors over the past few years, they have been right-sizing their portfolios. So I think many have come back into much less space. So I don't think there's too many around there that are coming back with bags of space like we had before COVID. So I think there's less of an opportunity to do that. But it does, of course, again, come back to change management, and that's an ongoing, that never stops. It's an ongoing challenge with communities of people.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. Change management never stops anyway, does it?
No.
It's always. Lisa, thank you for this question. Many organizations cite loss of workplace culture and decline in productivity as primary reasons for mandating a return to the office. From a workplace experience perspective, how can we challenge or reframe these assumptions, especially when the data that you showed shows that flexibility can actually enhance people's experience?
Well, I'd say the first point is use objective data, not headlines. Okay, newspapers are not about providing truth largely. They're about selling newspapers. So I would be very careful about those headlines that clients will send you from newspapers, which tend to be not a very well considered or researched view. And of course, also they pick the extremes, right? They don't give a balanced view on it. So I think gathering appropriate data is really key to be objective against a world of opinion and emotion when it comes back to this. But yeah, I think ultimately this is about experience design, and don't look to offices for good examples of that. Look to retail and entertainment.
Great, thank you. Conrad says that you mentioned HR and real estate becoming much closer together. But what he's saying is he had mixed experience of observing how well that's gone. It appears you may have had better experiences or observed better experiences. Is that correct? Has it worked? Have you seen any challenges when that happens?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I think it's been around long enough now that we can start to see some of the challenges, and it is amazing. And like you were saying, I've done quite a bit of speaking at HR conferences, and it is quite amazing how little real estate vocabulary they have, or they've just never really even thought about the role of physical place in terms of the package. So that can be quite a challenge in terms of working, with a different client group. But I think, for those of us that are designers, it's always been part of our job to translate between different client groups and to help one see the other's perspective and translate into language that they can understand. But I think it comes back to that second priority from the What OKR Wants survey, which is about evolving real estate organizations, which is about shifting the skills that they need in order to talk to HR and to talk to a new generation of workforce, and also shifting the data sets that they need to gather in order to have those conversations in a meaningful way. Again, a lot of this comes back to data and just having some evidence for what we're talking about.
Thank you. Elle obviously joined our most recent webinar, which was with Leaseman, and they shared some data that actually focus seemed to be much more important than collaboration, which is slightly different to your data. Do you have any observations around that?
Well, it's exactly the same as our data, because our number one driver for well-being is renew, which is your ability to maintain your energy levels over the course of a day. And obviously, focus is a slightly different thing, but it is about escape, and it's about the individual as opposed to collaboration. We did see number two is about inspiration, but that's for younger generations, and that's not necessarily collaborative. It could be something that people, I think it mostly is, but it can be something that people experience by themselves.
Yeah, so explain to me what a typical renew space might be like, or is there not a typical renew space?
Well, I think it's about space to escape and unwind. I think a simple example is just nature, right? Most of us, when we go on holidays to renew our energy levels, will go to the mountains or the beach. Some people will go to cities, but mostly it's about connection with nature and that ability to slow down out of the corporate pace into something that's more human scale, I guess. So natural materials, light levels that change, noise levels that change. Maybe it's a technology-free space. Yes, and it comes back to differences between introverts and extroverts, right? Extroverts recharge with other people, introverts recharge alone.
Great, thank you. Can I go back to your workplace per square foot? Who are you asking, and what's the process of that data, and how do you do that?
So that one is the bottom-up data set that goes to all employees in an organization, and it's just simply it's a survey which comes out as a link in an email. It takes about 10-15 minutes to do, depending on the modules that they want to put in. And then the data is benchmarked against other experience scores for other competitors and sectors. And the data can show organizations. It's done as part of a workplace strategy project, and it is done to help identify areas of investment.
Great, thank you. I'll make this the last question. Rosalie says they're trying to understand the behavior of individuals. Are occupancy sensors one of the key drivers for, or key ways of collecting this metric? What are some best ways to kind of collect and observe behavior?
Yeah, so we certainly, I think, saw a flurry of sensor use, and some organizations are using them a lot, and they obviously produce great volumes of data. They can be expensive, so I think that can put a lot of clients off. Surveying is a much cheaper tool, but it is a lot of organizations get over surveyed and are quite resistant to that. Putting in trained observers is another way to do it, where it's less of an expense and it's over a shorter period of time. But I think just asking people what they think in a structured way is one of the best ways to gather data.
Yeah, sometimes it's walking the floor, isn't it? Just observing and talking, and sometimes it's not always that kind of. It's often what, it's the why, and I think that's
exactly.
definitely one of the big challenges. Well, Nicola, I just want to say a great big thank you very much for great insights, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. Your thank yous will be in the form of thank yous in the chat, and I'm sure people will want to connect with you afterwards.
Lovely. Thanks very much.